Imagine this for a second. A child loses their home. A family is just suddenly stripped of their land. Right at this very moment, thousands of people are losing their basic freedom of movement. And as this deeply personal, incredibly devastating tragedy unfolds on the ground, the rest of the world kind of just watches. The United Nations holds debates, news channels argue endlessly. It's a stark, almost jarring visual contrast, isn't it? You have the immediate, visceral reality of a lost home pitted directly against the sterile, slow-moving backdrop of distant global politics.
Okay, let's dive into this. If almost every single nation on Earth claims to fiercely believe in democracy, international law, and human rights, then why do military occupations and severe territorial conflicts continue to get massive political, military, and diplomatic backing? Basically, why do powerful nations back occupying powers? It's honestly one of the most complex and arguably frustrating paradoxes of our modern world. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to objectively break down the cold logic of statecraft before circling back to the moral core. We'll hit 1. The global rights paradox, 2. Security and strategic geography, 3. Wealth, politics, and power, 4. International law versus reality, and 5. Interests versus human rights. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the global rights paradox. When we look at international politics, it's super tempting to just look for a single definitive villain or a one-size-fits-all reason why a powerful country acts the way it does. But the truth is, it's a massive high-stakes balancing act. A nation is constantly juggling a huge multitude of competing interests. We're talking national security, strategic geography, economic interests, military alliances, domestic politics, fear of instability, and global power competition. It's an incredibly intricate web of realpolitik. Governments aren't just making simple black and white choices between right and wrong. They're constantly weighing how a single diplomatic move will ripple through this entire ecosystem of interests. Moving right along to Section 2, security and strategic geography. At the end of the day, every government operates on one foundational responsibility, right? Protecting its own citizens. If supporting another country strengthens intelligence sharing or helps counter terrorism, governments generally view that support as an absolute strategic necessity to prevent larger wars. And physical location heavily dictates how they do that. Strategic geography is all about securing sea routes, maintaining open trade corridors, and controlling military choke points. Some regions on the global map are absolutely crucial simply because of where they sit. Whoever has influence in those spots gains a massive geopolitical advantage. So, for a policymaker, maintaining a relationship with an ally who controls a vital sea route might be seen as completely non-negotiable, even if that ally is facing heavy criticism on the world stage.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is Section 3, wealth, politics, and power.
This is exactly where financial and domestic realities intimately collide with global stances. Just look at the dual pressures pulling on global leaders. On one side, you've got economic anchors. We're talking billion-dollar defense deals, massive trade agreements, tech partnerships, energy infrastructure. Countries are naturally going to be super reluctant to weaken relationships that prop up their own economies. But then, on the exact same level, you have domestic pressures. Leaders have to think about upcoming elections, deeply entrenched lobbying groups, and highly vocal diaspora communities. International decisions are very rarely made in a vacuum. Actually, scratch that, they're literally never made in a vacuum. They are heavily shaped by this intense pressure cooker of domestic politics and wealth. And we have to remember, this pressure scales up drastically on the global stage. Here we see the major tension between maintaining military alliances versus rival global power competition. Powerful nations build alliances for collective security, sure, and supporting an ally, even a really controversial one, is often seen as necessary just to maintain the credibility of that alliance. But there's a colder, harder fear at play here too, sheer geopolitical competition. Think about it. What happens if a superpower pulls support from a strategic ally over human rights concerns? They are terrified that a rival global power will simply step right in, fill that void, and increase its own influence. It's like a giant, high-stakes game of chess. And this fear of losing influence leads directly to what policymakers call the domino effect. They are deeply, deeply afraid of sudden political change. If an occupying power is suddenly weakened, leaders worry it could trigger a disastrous chain reaction. Step 1, you get a sudden power vacuum. Step 2, that vacuum sparks civil wars and empowers extremist groups. And Step 3, that resulting violence leads to massive refugee crises and wider regional conflict. So more often than not, powerful nations will support the status quo, simply because they fear the explosive instability of change. Which brings us to Section 4, international law versus reality.
So there is severe friction between what is written on paper and what actually happens in the real world. On paper, international law is very, very clear. It provides strict rules regarding occupation and the protection of civilians. But here is the stark political reality. Enforcing those rules relies entirely on political will. When major global powers disagree, which, let's be honest, they almost always do, international institutions struggle to act effectively. There is a severe and sometimes truly tragic gap between the legal principles we've agreed upon as a global society and the reality of how those rules are actually enforced when powerful interests are on the line. And that leads us to our final section. Section 5, Interests versus Human Rights. Having broken down the cold logic of statecraft, we really have to pivot back to the human element here. The big question is, do these strategic goals come at the cost of basic human rights? The source material we're looking at explicitly points to specific conflict zones like Palestine, Ukraine, Sudan, and Myanmar. And the overarching principle to take away here is that human rights are universal. They are supposed to apply everywhere. It absolutely shouldn't matter which side of a border someone lives on or which powerful country supports their government. The suffering of civilians in any of these regions highlights the exact same core issue: the global struggle to prioritize human dignity over geopolitical chess.
Just imagine if world leaders, right before they put on their tailored suits for international summits, or before they shake hands on those billion-dollar defense deals we talked about, actually stopped and asked themselves one simple question. Are innocent people able to live with dignity, safety, and freedom? A suit might symbolize diplomacy, and a tie might symbolize power, but none of that holds any true meaning if human dignity is continuously ignored in the pursuit of strategic interests.
And this brilliantly illustrates history's ultimate undeniable reality. A temporary peace, one that is built only on military strength and the suppression of rights, almost always crumbles. It just doesn't last. A lasting peace, however, is built on justice, accountability, dialogue, and a genuine respect for human rights. It requires looking past the immediate geopolitical advantage and investing in the actual long-term safety and freedom of people.
So the reasons powerful nations support occupations are undeniably complex. They're rooted deeply in security, economics, geography, and, quite frankly, fear. But understanding these motivations doesn't necessarily mean we have to accept them as the final word. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to consider today. Should national interests come before human rights? Or should powerful nations place the protection of civilians at the dead center of every single foreign policy decision they make? Weigh that complex balance of statecraft and human dignity for yourself, and let me know where you stand. Thanks so much for joining.